I had always thought my life was flawless, the kind of life other people scrolled through on Instagram and whispered about with envy. My husband, a man whose success seemed almost mythical, had built a world around me that sparkled with wealth, privilege, and comfort. Our weekends were spent at sprawling estates, private beaches, and five-star resorts, while weekdays unfolded in a rhythm of power lunches and lavish social events. I had everything I could have dreamed of: status, security, love, or so I believed. That illusion shattered the moment I picked up the glossy, embossed envelope that had arrived on a warm Thursday morning. It was from my brother, announcing his upcoming wedding, complete with intricate calligraphy, glittering details, and most shockingly, a guest list that included my husband's ex. My heart lurched, an icy wave of disbelief washing over me. I read her name again, as if my eyes could convince themselves it was a mistake, a cruel joke. But no, there it was, printed clearly in gold alongside other friends and family I barely recognized. Humiliation settled in my chest, sharp and suffocating. The man I had trusted, the man I had adored, had not only invited her, but had made it clear she would be seated near the head table, under the same chandeliers I had envisioned our own love thriving beneath. Anger bubbled beneath the surface, hot and relentless, as my mind replayed every subtle slight, every moment of arrogance I had previously ignored. I could almost hear the unspoken conversation. This was his way of asserting that she still mattered, still had power, still held a claim to a world I had assumed was ours alone. My carefully curated life, my family's grandeur, and my own sense of dignity suddenly felt fragile, precarious, as if one misstep would expose the emptiness lurking beneath the gilded surface. And beneath that humiliation, beneath the sting of betrayal, a fire began to ignite, a quiet, burning resolve that this slight, this audacious affront, would not go unanswered. I looked around our penthouse, the skyline glowing behind floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time, the luxury felt hollow. The crystal chandeliers, the silk drapes, the artworks that had once filled me with pride, all seemed to mock me now, symbols of a world that was no longer safe from intrusion. The contrast was unbearable. The life I had worked to perfect, the man I had loved without reservation, and the audacity of someone from his past stepping so boldly into our shared present. I clutched the invitation, my hands trembling, and felt a mixture of rage, disbelief, and the faintest spark of exhilaration, because I knew deep down that this would not be the end. It would be the beginning. My brother had always lived as if the world revolved around him, and the wedding he was planning proved it more than ever. The invitations alone were a statement of opulence, hand-printed on thick, gilded paper, with wax seals stamped in gold, promising an affair that would make society pages weep with envy. The venue was a sprawling estate perched on a hill, complete with manicured gardens, fountains, and a ballroom that could host an entire army of photographers and socialites. Every detail, from the flower arrangements to the hors d'oeuvres, screamed wealth and status, a world I had long admired but also resented at times for its hollow perfection. The guests, a parade of designer labels and sparkling jewelry, floated through the announcement photos like butterflies preening under the sun, their conversations polished, superficial, and entirely performative. Watching from the sidelines, I remembered the subtle dismissals of my childhood, my achievements quietly overshadowed by his, my successes noted politely but never celebrated, my opinions often ignored in family decisions. While he thrived on accolades, my contributions, no matter how significant, were quietly minimized. I remembered the time our parents had gifted him a car on his 16th birthday, while I received a used hand-me-down, and the moments when praise for his minor accomplishments eclipsed my hard-earned victories. That sense of favoritism, those small, almost invisible slights, had lingered in me like a shadow I couldn't shake. The memory made the idea of attending a wedding where my husband's ex would be celebrated near him feel like a cruel echo of every past slight. Even now, as I tried to swallow the bitter truth, I couldn't help but notice the social pressures weaving through the event. The whispered comparisons between families, the veiled critiques of outfits, the subtle jockeying for status that every attendee seemed to embrace instinctively. It was a world where charm and appearance outweighed substance, where alliances were formed and broken over champagne flutes, and where my place, despite my wealth and achievements, felt precarious. I could feel the audience rooting for me as they imagined standing in my shoes, surrounded by beauty and luxury, yet suffocating under the weight of social judgment and family favoritism. Those memories of being sidelined, overlooked, and quietly dismissed only fanned the embers of determination inside me, reminding me that the upcoming events were about far more than appearances. They were about reclaiming respect, dignity, and a sense of justice long denied. I couldn't stop replaying the invitation in my mind, her name glittering in gold letters as if daring me to react. My first instinct was fury, hot, sharp, and immediate. But beneath it simmered something more dangerous. A cold, calculating awareness of the social theater I was about to enter. What would it feel like, sitting there as everyone sipped champagne, all eyes subtly measuring me against her? Would they notice my irritation, my sharp glance, my quiet discomfort? The thought of being overshadowed, of letting her steal even a fragment of attention or admiration, made my stomach churn with anxiety. I had worked so hard to secure my place in this world, to craft an image of poise and power. To be underestimated now felt intolerable. I imagined the whispers, the subtle glances, the unspoken judgments that often flowed beneath the polite laughter of gatherings like these. Fear of being replaced, of seeming less elegant, less accomplished, or less worthy, ignited a FOMO I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about my husband or his ex, it was about every friend, every distant cousin, every social acquaintance silently cataloging my failures. I realized then that humiliation could take many forms. Public embarrassment, whispered slights, or the quiet erosion of my perceived status. And yet within that fear, an idea began to form. Perhaps I didn't have to endure this passively. Perhaps the social stage, the very thing that threatened me, could be turned into my weapon. I began to mentally map the wedding, identifying moments where subtle interventions could tilt the scales. A strategic comment here, a well-timed revelation there, an elegant display of wealth or competence, each action carefully calculated to assert dominance without overt confrontation. My mind raced with possibilities, weighing the risks and rewards of subtle versus explosive retaliation. Private revenge had a satisfaction all its own, a quiet triumph that no one could anticipate or diminish. Yet the temptation of public vindication, of watching eyes widen in surprise and admiration, was undeniable. I felt a thrill, an intoxicating mix of anxiety and anticipation, as I realized that humiliation and revenge were two sides of the same coin, and I intended to choose which side the world would see. As I sat in the quiet of our penthouse, the sparkling city lights below doing nothing to calm the storm inside me, memories of his past began to surface unbidden. I remembered the stories he had told, casually, with a smirk or a laugh that made it seem trivial, about his previous relationships. How easily he had dismissed her, how he had flaunted his success while making her feel small, inadequate, replaceable. At the time, I had laughed along, pretending to be amused, masking the unease that churned quietly inside me. Now, recalling those moments felt like peeling back a layer of varnish to reveal something far uglier beneath. His arrogance had always been subtle, hidden in charm and gestures of wealth, but unmistakably present. I saw, in vivid flashes, the little betrayals that had always left a bruise beneath the surface, forgotten birthdays, overlooked achievements, offhand dismissals wrapped in a smile. Even with me, I realized, he had a way of undermining without ever seeming cruel, ensuring that I doubted my place, my worth, my power. Those memories, once softened by time, now pressed against me like a vice. Resentment surged, mingling with a strange, bitter empathy. I could almost feel the ex's fear, her hopes carefully built only to be dismissed, the way he had treated her as a stepping stone to his own validation. The tension coiled inside me tighter with every remembered slight. If he could so casually disregard her, so easily insert her into my family's celebration without a second thought, what did that mean for me now? The anger was sharp, immediate, but beneath it, a cold clarity emerged. I would not allow myself to be another passive casualty in his pattern of arrogance. I would anticipate, plan, and reclaim the narrative before he could dictate it. And as the city lights reflected in the glass before me, I felt the first thrill of strategy. The confrontation looming was inevitable, and when it came, It would be on my terms, not his. I spent hours alone, tracing every possible scenario in my mind, replaying the invitation, the ex's name, the audacity of it all. The anger had evolved into something sharper now, calculated, precise. I whispered to myself, almost as if testing the words aloud. I won't let her walk into that wedding and steal what is mine. But I knew I had to tread carefully. A public scene would feed gossip and cheap drama. It wouldn't prove anything. I needed elegance, subtlety, something that would strike without appearing aggressive, something that would make everyone see the truth without me having to raise my voice. I considered the ways to assert my dominance without direct confrontation. A misplaced detail here, a revealing comment there, gestures that only the observant would notice, small dominoes that could topple the illusion of control the ex thought she still held. My mind raced through every social interaction, every potential ally in the room, and how I could manipulate perceptions. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about fairness, about exposing arrogance, reclaiming respect, and demonstrating that those who underestimate me do so at their peril. Moral stakes weighed heavily on me. I wasn't seeking revenge for the thrill alone. I wanted justice, validation, and most importantly, to show that I refused to be diminished. Every step of my plan had to balance impact with integrity. I imagined the power reversal. Her confident smirk replaced by uncertainty. The heads of the social elite subtly nodding in my direction, acknowledging my control without me ever demanding it. The thought sent a shiver of anticipation down my spine. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about reclaiming the narrative of my life, proving to myself and everyone else that underestimation would never define me again. The week leading up to the wedding felt like a high-stakes game. Each day, a careful move on a board I had only just begun to understand. I watched as invitations were confirmed, RSVPs finalized, and the guest list whispered its way through social circles. Every detail mattered. The seating arrangements, the favored friends, the photographers who would capture moments meant to define status and reputation. I realized that everyone was performing, displaying wealth, elegance, and poise as though it were a competitive sport. And if everyone else was playing, then I would play smarter, more intentionally, with precision. I started planting subtle seeds, casual remarks here, flashes of confidence there, all designed to create tension without appearing calculated. A compliment to the right relative, a knowing glance at someone influential, small gestures that hinted at my presence and capability. I allowed whispers of envy to circulate, just enough to make people pause and reconsider their assumptions about me. Every interaction became a chess move, a way to leverage the perceptions of class, wealth, and influence to my advantage. Even as I smiled politely at distant relatives and exchanged pleasantries with family friends, my mind churned behind the facade. I imagined how the ex would notice these small shifts, how her confidence might waver when subtle power dynamics shifted against her. The anticipation of seeing her reaction at the wedding tightened my chest, a mixture of excitement and nerves that only sharpened my focus. With each passing day, the stage was set, the pieces moving into position, and I could feel the thrill of the impending twist building, promising a moment of revelation that would tip the scales and restore the balance I had long been denied. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers, soft golden light casting everyone in perfection, and yet all I could see was her, the ex, smiling confidently, convinced she still owned some claim to this world. I took a deep breath and reminded myself, subtlety was everything. A loud confrontation would ruin the effect. It needed to feel organic, almost accidental, so that everyone noticed without thinking I had orchestrated it. I positioned myself near the cocktail table, letting my presence be felt, poised, composed, effortlessly elegant. The whispers started almost immediately, guests noting my designer ensemble, the sparkle of the diamond bracelet that matched my husband's cufflinks, the ease with which I moved through the room. As the ex passed, I allowed a slight, almost imperceptible gesture to catch her attention. A glance paired with a perfectly timed comment, casually referencing a minor social faux pas she had made months ago. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, almost imperceptible, but the shift was electric. My husband noticed too, confusion flickering across his face as he tried to process the subtle but undeniable shift in attention. I felt the thrill of power pulse through me. No words spoken, yet my status, my poise, my moral superiority, all broadcast quietly but unmistakably. The moment was fleeting, but the effect was immediate. Conversations around us hesitated, eyes darting briefly between her and me, measuring, judging. The ex straightened, recalibrating her posture, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. My husband's smirk, always so certain, wavered for the first time in years. The stage was set for what was coming next, and I could feel the tension in the room tighten like a drawn bow. The audience, watching closely in my mind, would sense the shift too. The promise that the seemingly untouchable ex had just been put in her place, and the best was still to come. Later, away from the chandeliers and murmuring guests, I found myself in the study with my brother and a few close relatives, the room quiet except for the soft hum of classical music. I let my eyes linger on the objects that symbolized our family's wealth: a crystal decanter, gilded frames, awards lining the shelves, and thought about how easily appearances could deceive. Leaning casually against the doorway, I began weaving subtle observations into conversation, careful to mention details that only someone truly attentive would notice. Did anyone realize how she mispronounced the French wine list earlier? Such a small slip, yet so revealing, I said, letting the words float casually. My brother looked at me, a faint smirk forming as he caught the meaning behind my words, while the relatives exchanged subtle glances. I could see the understanding spark quietly, like a flame in each of their eyes. I was not merely a guest. I was fully aware, fully in control. I guided the conversation further, dropping hints about loyalty, respect, and reputation, using examples from past family events to emphasize lessons subtly learned. The tension in the room shifted. My presence alone now commanded attention. Internally, I reflected on what had brought me here. This was never about cruelty. It was about proving that arrogance and entitlement could not overshadow integrity and intelligence. Every gesture, every carefully chosen phrase, reinforced my strategy, revealing not only my cleverness, but also the emotional stakes: dignity, respect, and recognition. By the time I left the study, I knew the subtle groundwork had been laid. The ex's position, once seemingly untouchable, was now fragile, and the room's whispered acknowledgement of my insight promised that the next moves would tilt the balance decisively in my favor. The moment arrived with all the subtlety of a storm breaking over calm waters. As the wedding toast began, I stood near the head table, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. The ex sat opposite me, radiant and composed, certain she was the center of attention. I smiled politely, letting my calmness speak volumes before planting a seed that would grow into something unforgettable. Casually, I brought up an anecdote from our shared social circle, something only insiders knew. I painted the picture carefully, drawing attention to her past manipulations, her attempts to charm others at the expense of honesty and decency. The room shifted, curious murmurs spreading like wildfire. She noticed immediately, her confident mask faltering for the briefest instant. My husband's expression tightened, caught between disbelief and realization, and I allowed myself a tiny, imperceptible smirk. Every guest was leaning in now, sensing the tension and the truth slipping into the light. I didn't raise my voice, didn't point a finger. The weight of evidence, my composed demeanor, and the elegance of delivery did all the work. Power had shifted. Where she had walked in commanding attention, she now recoiled subtly. Her aura of dominance cracked before the very people she had hoped to impress. The moral satisfaction was electric, a quiet but undeniable victory. I could feel it radiating through the room, a resonance that transcended gossip. It was recognition, validation, and justice in a single potent moment. In the midst of champagne glasses and whispered questions, I allowed myself a private breath of triumph. The audience could almost taste it too. The catharsis of seeing entitlement undone by intelligence, grace, and patience. The ex was no longer untouchable. I had reclaimed my social power, and in doing so, reaffirmed my place not just beside my husband, but in the eyes of every guest who mattered. The stage was fully set now, the next chapter of consequences ready to unfold. The reactions were instantaneous, subtle, but undeniable. My husband's jaw tightened, a twitch of frustration crossing his usually confident face, and I could see the realization settling in. He had underestimated me. The ex sat frozen, her carefully cultivated composure cracking under the weight of polite but knowing glances from the guests. Whispers rippled through the room, polite questions layered with curiosity and judgment, and I felt a thrill of control. I had not raised my voice. I had not demanded attention, yet the narrative had shifted entirely to my favor. Family members exchanged glances that spoke volumes, some admiring my poise, others astonished at the quiet, undeniable authority I had asserted. I allowed myself a brief inward smile, recognizing the subtle power I now wielded. I controlled the story, the perception, the emotional undercurrent of the room. The humiliation of arrogance and entitlement had been exposed, and it was satisfying to witness, even in these understated ways. Amid the tension release, I reflected on the stakes that had brought me here, my dignity, my place within the family, and my refusal to be diminished. Every glance, every hushed murmur reinforced my empowerment, reminding me that subtlety often spoke louder than confrontation. Yet, even as the atmosphere shifted in my favor, I could sense an undercurrent of lingering resentment, the faint pulse of anticipation for what might come next. The stage was set, the pieces in motion, and I knew this was only the beginning of a reckoning that would continue to unfold in ways neither of them could predict. By the time the evening reached its peak, I could feel the culmination of every calculated move, every quiet observation, every subtle gesture aligning into a singular, undeniable truth. I was in control. The ex had retreated into a corner, her smile gone, replaced by the polite, uneasy expressions of someone realizing her perceived power had evaporated. My husband, who had thought himself untouchable, now met my gaze with a mixture of surprise and reluctant acknowledgement. I didn't need to speak. My presence, my poise, and the ripple of admiration from those around me said everything. I had reclaimed the narrative, restored my dignity, and reminded everyone, including myself, that I was not to be underestimated. Guests subtly shifted their attention toward me, complimenting my insight, charm, and grace in moments that seemed effortless yet carefully orchestrated. Every laugh, every nod, every whispered acknowledgement felt like a small victory, a testament to patience and intelligence triumphing over arrogance. I allowed myself a quiet satisfaction, savoring the moral and karmic balance that had been restored. It was not about vengeance alone. It was about demonstrating that integrity, subtlety, and strategic thinking could prevail in a world obsessed with appearances and entitlement. As I glanced around the room, I noticed how easily my restored authority rippled through the social hierarchy. The ex's confidence had been replaced by self-consciousness, and my husband's respect once assumed had been recalibrated. I felt empowered, liberated, and above all, vindicated. The evening, with all its glitter and spectacle, had become my stage, and I had performed perfectly. Not with arrogance, but with intelligence and grace. In that moment, I knew that the lesson was not only learned but witnessed, and the satisfaction of justice served, both quietly and publicly, left a thrill that would linger long after the last guest departed. Later that night, alone in the quiet of our penthouse, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The city lights glimmered below, indifferent to the small dramas and triumphs that had unfolded within our gilded walls, yet they seemed to mirror the clarity I now felt inside. I thought back to every slight, every moment of dismissal, every subtle injustice I had endured, and recognized how each one had shaped me, honed my awareness, and sharpened my resolve. There was a bittersweet weight in acknowledging that the path to empowerment had required patience, observation, and a careful mind, but the reward had been absolute. Dignity reclaimed, respect restored, and a narrative rewritten entirely on my terms. I reflected on the cleverness I had employed, the subtle manipulations, the strategic gestures that had shifted perceptions without ever resorting to overt conflict. It was proof that intelligence and composure could dismantle arrogance and entitlement far more effectively than anger or confrontation. Yet, beneath the satisfaction, I felt the quiet pang of knowing that some relationships could never fully return to their old ease. that the echoes of betrayal lingered even in victory. And still, the triumph was mine, earned, deliberate, and deeply satisfying. In the end, I understood that empowerment was not only about public recognition, but also inner clarity, the confidence of knowing I would never again be underestimated or dismissed. The ex had faded into the background, my husband's arrogance tempered by reality, and I stood, quietly victorious, fully aware of my strength and resilience. The night left a lingering catharsis, a sense of justice quietly balanced, and a profound understanding that sometimes the greatest power comes not from confrontation, but from patience, strategy, and unwavering self-belief.